Evangelicalism is one of those words that sounds obvious until you try and define it. Some people use it as the idea is it's sort of a voting bloc or a subculture or a style of church or maybe a theology, a social tribe, or even just a church with guitars and thematic sermons. But historically, it's much, much more precise than that. Evangelicalism itself is a Protestant movement with a particular set of instincts. It grows strongly out of the revival world of the 18th century, especially around figures like John Wesley or George Whitfield. And then it keeps mutating as it moves through Britain and America. It has missions and conferences and student movements and publishing and the modern media. The cleanest short definition still comes from David Bebbington. He says that evangelical religion is marked by four emphases, and that is conversion, the Bible, the cross of Christ, and activism. So, an evangelical, he would say, thinks that Christianity must be personally embraced. It's not something you merely inherit. And an evangelical gives the Bible a governing place and also treats the death of Christ as central to salvation. And then they also expect faith to do something. It has to preach and organize and campaign, evangelize and build. I think that helps Christianity, but it still leaves something out because evangelicalism is more than a checklist. It's also a style of Christian seriousness. It wants the gospel to become urgent and religion to become personal, and it wants doctrine to be moving forward. It also wants Christianity to get out of the Anglican prayer book, out of the inherited label, and into the bloodstream of individuals. And that is why it has often been so energetic. It gives you revival preaching and hymns that ordinary people can sing, and missionary activism, small groups, Bible reading plans, and a sense that grace is not simply true, but grace is near you as an individual. And it carries some of its own problems with it as well, because movements built on urgency can become impatient, and sometimes movements built on conversion become suspicious of that slow formation of a spiritual life. And then if it's built on activism, it can start mistaking moving forward as being grown up. And movements, even movements built on the Bible, can still end up fighting bitterly about how the Bible should be read. That's part of the reason I'm doing a longer series about how evangelicalism can be both beautiful and broken, and its real strengths and its real weaknesses are often the same, and they just have maybe the volume turned up a little bit. So, is evangelicalism a denomination? The answer is no, it isn't in that sense, but it's a movement that moves through denominations. It can be Anglican, Methodist, Baptist, Congregationalist, Presbyterian, Free Church, Independent Church, and now all sorts of post denominational spaces as well. And that flexibility is part of its strength because it can travel light. As an evangelical, you can move from one church to the other, but it's also part of the problem because it can become thin on church order and sacrament, and it can have very little historical memory. So here's the simplest way I would put it. Evangelicalism is Protestant Christianity with urgency in its bones. It wants new birth, biblical authority, Christ crucified, and active faith. Sometimes it produces courage, and other times shallowness, and it can produce reform or fragmentation. And whether or not we admire it, it has been one of the most powerful ways Christianity has been lived, preached, sung, and argued about in the modern English speaking world.